This afternoon, I have the pleasure of welcoming Liz Martin to participate in our Sexual Health West World AIDS Day events. Liz will be doing a reading from her powerful book, Still Standing, An Irish Woman's Journey of HIV and Hope. The theme for World AIDS Day this year is Ending the HIV/AIDS Epidemic, Resilience and Impact. And Liz's book offers us a window into the hope and resilience that she's had in her life through many challenging years and experiences. So it's a brilliant opportunity to include Liz reading some samples from her book in our events for today. So Liz, welcome and thank you very much for being with us today.
Thanks very much. It's great to see you today. It's great to be given this opportunity.
So you've selected a few parts of the book to read to us today.
I have, and I've chosen some from when I was diagnosed HIV positive back in 1991, and I'm in Galway, and I'm living in a rural community. At the time, there was no HIV clinic in Galway, so I was actually attending a different clinic. It was actually for hematology and oncology unit. So I'd been to see Dr. O'Brien again that January, and he suggested that I should make an appointment with the doctor in the Galway hospital. He also said it would be a good idea to make a list of questions that I wanted him to answer for me. So I did as he suggested and set off for the hospital. The clinic was a cold place and not very uplifting. My first impressions of the doctor, I have to admit, weren't up to much. But armed with my questions, I started. How would I know when I was seriously sick? How effective was the treatment, and how would I know when to start it? I plodded along, asking one by one until I got to my final question. What is the likelihood of me developing full-blown AIDS? Well, I'll put it to you this way. You're dying, was his answer. I was so shocked, I didn't know what to say to him. I got up and I walked out of the hospital gates. All that went through my head was, I'm dying, I'm dying. This went through my head for days, and at some time I must have rang Jean and told her the news. And she was as shocked as I was. How does he know? Does he think that he's the God Almighty? How does he know how you're going to be dead before you? He could be dead before you. I laughed. Had we come nowhere in the past 10 years since the virus hit the headlines? Had people learned nothing? However, Jean soon settled me down. She was always there to listen and offer sound advice. My next encounter with the doctor wasn't any better. By this time, I was ready for him. I was again in his clinic for a checkup when he said, I think I need to refer you to our social work department. And what do I need to see a social worker for? Because you're destitute and in need of help. Destitute? Where are you getting that from? You're destitute. I'm by no means destitute. I'm a young mother with young children and I'm HIV positive, not destitute. My name is Anna Mahon, and I'm not just another number on your chart. Do you hear me? I'm not a number. My name is Anna, and I'm not destitute, just HIV positive, okay? Taking off his glasses, he stared at me. I could feel his eyes going through me. I didn't move. I'm sorry, Anna. You're right. I just want to see you. I just want you to see me as a person and not a number. Numbers don't have feelings. I needed him to see that I was still a person, that I wasn't the virus, nor was I ever going to be the virus. It was something in my life that I was going to have to live with. And there were so many more important things in it already. My children, for one thing. I was not going to be labelled by anyone, no matter who they were. From then on, Mr. Doctor and I got on just fine. So I'm now going to read you another extract. And I suppose this kind of feels to me like the time of the witch hunt. So in the months that followed Emer's death, I asked her family for their permission to make a panel for the Irish AIDS Memorial quilt in her memory. They gave their approval, and Emer's sister lovingly made and added her contributions too. Each was a symbol of her life and a token of our love for her. The idea of an AIDS memorial quilt was conceived in November 1985 in San Francisco by gay rights activist Cleve Jones. Jones was involved in planning an annual candlelit march honouring gay San Francisco supervisor Harvey Milk and Mayor George Moscone, who had been assassinated in 1978. While organising the march, he discovered that over 1,000 San Franciscans had died from AIDS. He asked each of the marchers to write on placards the names of friends and family who had died from the virus. These were then taped to the walls of the San Francisco Federal Building when the march was over. These huge displays of names resembled a patchwork quilt. Jones was so taken by the sight, he was inspired to create a larger memorial. The following year, he created the first panel of what was to become the AIDS Memorial Quilt in memory of one of his friends, Marvin Feldman. In June of 1987, he and a number of others gathered together to document the lives of those who had died from AIDS and thereby help people understand the devastating impact of the disease, thus in establishing the foundation of the Names Project, the AIDS Memorial Quilt. When a display of thousands of assembled panels was erected on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., during the National March on Washington for Lesbian and Gay Rights in October that year, it caught the public's imagination and established the quilt as America's National AIDS Memorial. It covered a space larger than a football field, and 500,000 people came to see it that weekend. The response led to a 4-month national tour that gathered momentum as it went from one state to state. Local panels were added at each venue, tripling in size by the end of the tour. By 1992, the quilt included panels from every state as well as 28 other countries. To date, over 44,000 individual panels have been made. Each panel measures 3 feet by 6 feet, the size of a standard grave, and usually carries the person's name and details of their life, their work, interests, or hobbies, along with messages of love from its creators. The panels are richly decorated, often with striking colours and images, so that when displayed, they are not only emotionally, but also visually stunning. Worldwide, the quilt has been established as a powerful symbol of remembrance for those who have died, and of hope for those living with AIDS. Ireland soon became part of the biggest community art project, and Emer's quilt panel was the first named panel in the west of Ireland. It has joined the Irish Quilt Tour and has been displayed not only in Ireland, but also overseas. I'm sure she would have been proud of her achievement. When one of the neighbours around the corner refused to let my daughter Rachel play with her child because there's bad blood in that family, I knew it was time to take more steps to rid society of the ignorance and prejudice that surrounded me. And there was no better place to start than in the town that I now called home. I refused to be witch hunted, and I wasn't going to sit back and watch my children being shunned. In November 1996, after months of planning, I organised an AIDS awareness weekend. I got some local bands together. The boy dance group travelled from Dublin, and donations of spot prizes from the local shops poured in for the raffle. The Irish AIDS Memorial Quilt was brought down from Dublin and displayed in the secondary schools. I told the story of the quilt to anyone who would listen, and everyone did. From the first years to 6 years, they all sat down in silence. I knew I had captured their attention, and when the school children went home, they told their parents the story of the quilt, educating the family as a whole about HIV. And when the Parents' Council asked if I would kindly do a special display for them and tell them the story too, I knew I'd cracked it. However, we ran into trouble when the local priest refused to mention the event because it was an issue that didn't concern the parish, he said. Now that I had people on my side, there was uproar. He was inundated with phone calls from irate parents asking, "What do you mean it doesn't concern the parish? HIV/AIDS affects everyone, and we want to know about it." Needless to say, he wasn't long changing his mind. Neither was the mother who turned up her nose at me when I was selling tickets for the AIDS West benefit gig that I'd arranged. As she slammed the door in my face, I heard her teenage daughter scream at her, and the mother came running down the garden after me, apologising and asking if she could buy not one, but 4 tickets to the gig. The benefit gig was a huge success. The local bands played everything from Van Morrison to Led Zeppelin. They even played Queen's The Show Must Go On. The dance group from Dublin was a big hit with the teenage girls, and many a tear was shed as they waved goodbye to their idols at the train station. Somewhere up there, Emer was smiling. I'd done it. I'd accomplished what I had set out to do. The Irish AIDS Awareness Weekend had changed people's attitudes, and the Irish AIDS Memorial Cult had touched everyone's heart.
That's lovely. What an amazing effort and result for educating the community.
Yeah, that actually was something that I felt that I really had to do, because, you know, like, it had got so bad that, like, someone had actually walked into the doctor and made up this story and said, well, what do I do if I'm asked to mind our children, and you know, like, my child bites her child, you know. And it was the locum doctor that was there, and I was in hospital at the time, and when I came out of the hospital, I went straight to the doctors, because the person who worked in the community had actually come to visit me to tell me this story. And I went straight to the doctor, and I said, you know, like, you've just gone and told someone who just randomly just walked in here, who made up a story about me, and you've said, well, you know, it's not our children that she has to worry about, you know. So the insurance company got involved in the school, and there was a huge, like, investigation into this, you know.
So there was just so much stigma in the community.
Yeah, very, very much so.
Yeah.
You know, people just didn't understand. So it really was about challenging people's perceptions. You know.
I'm sure that community is still living with the benefit of you doing that.
Yeah, I do believe so. You know, certainly the teenagers are all grown up now, and they've had their own families. You know, so I'd like to think that I have enlightened them a little bit, you know, about what it's like to live with HIV, and, you know, the stigma. So I did pick out another piece, but this is the part where you know, my health is again starting to fail, and Jean was actually my buddy, and my buddy is it's a befriender, and she came with, as it was called then, AIDS Help West. She was a volunteer with them, and she was a great support throughout my life. She's now retired, and but you know, she was with me and the family for like over 20 years, and we had a great relationship, you know. So she very much supported me, in particular, like through times of difficulty, and when I was sick, you know. So this is a little piece just about what happened. So it's all I remember was Jean driving me to the hospital in Galway. I had been feeling unwell for a while now, and hoping to shake off the bug I had, but without success. I was stretched out on the back seat of our car, going in and out of a deep sleep, finding it hard to breathe. I was admitted to an isolation unit and the doctor suspected it was PCP, or pneumocystis carinii pneumonia, which is an opportunistic infection. This was the infection that Emer had died from 5 years earlier. And if I wasn't so sick, I'd have been very, very scared. They treated me with a number of drugs, including Septrum, to try and get the pneumonia under control, but it didn't seem to be having any effect. I remember feeling really cold and turning blue. When the nurse took my temperature, it was 105. There was a fan in the room, but it wasn't enough. And I had to crawl out of the bed to the sink and stick my head under the cold running water to try and cool down. The medication made me feel really sick. I seemed to be getting worse instead of better. I was sure I wasn't that sick when I came in. Days went by in a haze of fever. Though I do remember the ward sister coming into my room at one point and asking me, "What's this, Anna?" as she held up the tray. "It's my cup, my plate, my spoon, my knife and fork," I mumbled, too weak to fight anymore. The hospital isolated the dishes I used because of their fear of HIV. They were still working on the mistaken belief that it could be transmitted through crockery. I was too ill to be giving the hospital staff a lecture on the roots of infection of HIV or to fight their prejudice. I needed someone else to do that for me. "I'll see about this," she continued. "I used to work as a nurse in San Francisco, and this sort of discrimination wouldn't have been tolerated, and I won't accept it. This ignorant behaviour here either." She took the tray and stormed out. Whatever she said or did worked, because for all my meal times after that, I no longer had to use my own utensils or crockery. But I was disturbed another day when two large men came into my room and moved my bed with me in it out to the corridor in order to scrub the floor. Along came the ward sister. "What's the meaning of this? Why is that woman being put out in the corridor? We were told to clean the room. Get out, the pair of you, and bring that bed back in there." And that was the end of that. I stopped the Septrum because I was vomiting too much. The doctor said it would be on my own head if I discontinued the medication, but I didn't care. I pulled the drips out and told them all to leave me alone. I'd get better myself. And I did. 2 weeks later, I was allowed home. There was valuable lessons learned. Ignorance and prejudice were alive and well in the hospital, but thankfully amongst only a minority of staff. How long would it take before people would let go of the stigma around the disease as we neared the 21st century? I really hoped it would come someday. Another lesson learned was that I was allergic to Septrum, one of the main drugs used to treat PCP. I was aware of how sick I'd been, how close I came to maybe not making it, and I promised myself I wouldn't leave it so long before I sought medical help in the future. Day by day, I got stronger and was soon back on my feet again. Shortly after that, I gave a public talk in the Great Southern Hotel in Galway as part of an AIDS awareness education night. So many people turned up to hear me talk, they had to open the ballroom to accommodate them. In front of over 200 people, I spoke about my life and what it was like living with HIV, the stigma attached to the virus and how it affected me and my children. To my surprise, I got a standing ovation, and afterwards, 6 student nurses from the hospital came up and thanked me for giving a wonderful talk. They told me they had never thought of what it must be like for those affected by HIV and promised that in their future careers as nurses, wherever in the world it brought them, they would now have more understanding of HIV/AIDS. Some years later, I was to encounter one of those student nurses who had been in the group that night. Now qualified, she sat by my bedside and told me she remembered me and the talk I gave and how much it had changed her life. She told me that before she met me that night, She had been thinking of giving up nursing, but listening to me had made her change her mind and stay with it. So,
Wonderful. That's lovely to know that that was so inspirational to keep somebody on their career path and out there spreading that message of tolerance and support rather than the stigmatized message that you'd experienced yourself.
yeah, I think getting to know people with HIV and actually having someone who is positive in your life does impact, and it certainly does help you to understand like what it's like to live with this, you know. It can be very isolating, you know, being positive. And I would say to people, you know, anyone that feels like isolated because of HIV and because of the level 5s and the lockdowns and not being able to connect with people and like see your friends for coffee and have those chats, that there is people there, you know, to use the phone and to pick up the phone to support groups and services, and to go ring that friend, you know, and go for that walk and have that coffee, you know. Like they are difficult times, and it's important to look after yourself, and as always, but it's particularly important in these times to look after yourself and your own well-being, you know, and just to know that you're not alone, you know. Like my book is also like when you read it, you will like hear stories of domestic abuse and what it was like to go off and live in refuges, and you know, to like that instability that came with that life and that roller coaster lifestyle, you know. Like that for women that feel that they're trapped in their homes too, to pick up the phone and to come out and to get that help. You know, there's always help there on the end of the phone, and please don't feel alone. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what we can definitely do at the end of this is to put up a little screen with those contact phone numbers. I mean, my contact phone number for people living in the west of Ireland, living with HIV, but also the Women's Aid and the other support services in this area.
Yeah.
We can definitely do that so that
Yeah.
people know where they can reach.
You know, some people like may read it because of the background of HIV and AIDS, and maybe want to know more about the stigma, but may also have other issues going on, you know, and it might bring up stuff for them from the past or from their family life, you know, their childhood, and they could be affected. So maybe it would be good to put out a few numbers there at the end as well, and that would be a good support to them, you know.
You know, the book, An Irish Woman's Story of HIV and Hope, there's such a lovely emphasis at the end of the book on the hope.
Well, you have to have hope, you know, and you know, you just need to get up and just stand up and be heard and face it, you know. But like the hope comes as well from the people that's around you. Like when I was first diagnosed in 1991, like it was a death sentence, you know, and like I had seen people dying throughout the 80s, and like I'd had friends that was hiding like AZT underneath their pillows, and had like the medication that they had was really, really toxic, and there was so many different side effects, and people were just so ill and so sick. And like in inner city Dublin growing up, it was like thought of like it was a gay disease. It was something that happened in America. It didn't happen here. And then came the heroin epidemic, and you know, concerned parents and took a stand against the drugs in the community. You have to have hope, you know. Like look at where we are now with the advances in treatment. Like I never thought I would have seen the day. I mean, I'm 29 years positive now. You know, it's coming up to my 29th anniversary on the 13th of December, when I first went into that doctor's surgery, and he was struggling to tell me that I was positive, the poor man. And I was at the bin sitting out in the waiting room, and I could hear what was going on from behind the curtain, and the wife telling him, but you have to tell her, and he's like, well, how can I tell her? She's like such a young woman, and she's got like all these little kids, and and the wife said, no, go out there and tell her, and like when I went in, I said, it's, I know. Yeah, 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 yeah.
We've
But
had to miss that conversation.
yeah. But together we learned, together. And he was a great support. And he was the local GP. But he from the offset, he said, I'm going to be really honest with you. I don't know anything about HIV. You're the first person that I've had to tell this news to. I've never had a patient who was HIV positive. So it was very much a learning experience for him too.
It sounds like your experience of being diagnosed with HIV and living with HIV in rural Galway certainly was very groundbreaking, not for the medical practitioners, for the community that you lived in. Very brave and to be so open and so intent on fighting the stigma and the prejudice that you came across.
Yeah, and there was a lot of it, there was an awful lot of stigma, but I was determined that I wasn't going to shut myself away and, just become this hermit that never went outside the door, I was greatly concerned about my children, going to school, and I didn't want them like being called names and and hearing this from other people and other children and in a negative way. So like sitting down to tell them that I was HIV positive, I felt it was the best thing to do, to arm them with the information before they heard it from somewhere else in a negative way, So yeah, but it was like I went into their schools and spoke in their schools and brought the quilt down and told them the story of the quilt, and all of the classes got together, and so we relayed the stories. And I remember there was one particular lad that thought it was funny, because he thought this was a DOS class. So I had given out lots of red ribbons, and he had the red ribbon and he took the pin, and of course he was sticking it in his pal beside him, and laughing. And I said, this is not a DOS class, like I'll go down now and I'll talk to the headmaster now and he won't be happy with you, and he was like, oh God, I better not do any carry on now. She's going to eat me, this woman, So when I told them the story about the quilt and about HIV for the 40 minutes that I had them, and he was sitting right up the front with the pal, at the end of the 40 minutes, he was forced up, thanking me, and he got the whole class up on their feet to thank me for coming to give my time to explain about what HIV was. He was the first up,
Yeah.
So it's those little stories,
Yeah. So, will I just read the last few sentences from the book? I just feel that it's just such a lovely way of wrapping up the story of hope. Really, it's such a strong message. So you've written, I'm not bitter at contracting HIV. Bitterness and anger eat away at your soul. In all the times I've been sick and my immune system low, I've learned you have to have hope. Without hope, you have nothing. For all those who are living with HIV and the families that are affected by it, remember you are not alone. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Above all, have hope.
Thank you.
It's just such a lovely, powerful message. And I really want to thank you so much for your time to share your story with us today. Very fortunate to have your support and your story out there in the world to help other people who are going through the experiences that you've gone through, and also people who aren't, but to know and hear the story of a real person, as you said earlier, to humanize that experience, to help us all have more empathy and understanding of those circumstances. It's so important, and we just want to thank you for sharing it with us, and today, especially on World AIDS Day.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for everything.
Yeah.
Thank you.